Recently, it was announced that E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, has been permanently cancelled. The news was somewhat sad to me, given the history and significance of the event, but honestly, with how the world is progressing and how differently media is consumed now, it made sense that the people lost interest in it. Personally, when I was a kid, I always loved looking at what was announced at E3 that year. There was always something amazing, like new games and sometimes new consoles. But as the years flew by, like other people, my interest had diminished as well. So as a small tribute to E3, today we're going to be looking at the E3 2003 maps of Half-Life 2. You see, when the Half-Life 2 leak happened, among the many things discovered, there were maps from E3 2002 and 2003 in there. I've covered the 2002 maps before, but this time around, we'll be looking at the 2003 maps. Starting off, I'll be summarizing what was in the E3 2003 presentation. Starting off, we have this demo of G-Man showcasing the new model, the facial expressions, the lighting, and just how much advanced it all had become. Then there's this tech demo which showcased the capabilities of the new Source engine. Then another tech demo to showcase the lighting and shaders. A Ravenholm Docks demo, another tech demo to show a conversation between Alex and Kleiner, a Ravenholm demo, a gameplay segment from the latter half of the game, a Nova Prospect demo, a Highway 17 demo, a late game gameplay segment again, and finally, a G-Man segment. Now I summarized all of this because we'll be looking at each of these maps ourselves and then some of the other maps in the leaked files that weren't part of the E3 showcase, but maybe they were supposed to be. The first map is E3 Tech Demo 1. This is the one with the Half-Life G-Man model that fades out, and in comes the brand spanking new high quality Half-Life 2 model. The G-Man gives us a bunch of different looks and starts speaking in another language.
那么看来我们是没有合作的机会了。
Right after that is the E3 Tech Demo 2. Here it shows how a displacement in the brush in the map can be moved. It shows how different objects and materials have different kind of weight, viscosity, and resistance to them. There's also a body here to move around with the ragdolls and all that, and all in all, it's one big showcase for the physics engine. This is E3 Tech Demo 5. This showcases the different textures, normal mapping, shaders. It showcases how light reacts to the environment. And lastly, there's this piece where the camera looks at G-Man and you can see G-Man on the monitor. So basically, it's a real-time camera setup. That was big at the time, believe me. Lastly, there's E3 Tech Demo 6. This is the docks area in Ravenholm. Now I don't know if this part was specifically made for this demo or if this was going to be part of the game, but all I can say is that I absolutely loved the skybox in this map and the overall vibe of the map itself. Now I say that this map feels like it's made for a tech demo is because that this basically feels like the starting part of the earlier Ravenholm cut maps that were later developed into the final version we have today. After that we have E3 Lab, which is the demo that showcases dialogue between Alex and Dr. Kleiner. From what I can tell, this is basically showcasing how advanced the facial expressions the game had and how the animations for the models worked. If we move around, we can see this earlier version of Kleiner's lab. There is also E3 Lab Sentences, which has old Alex lines from a different voice actor. Kleiner doesn't say anything, but Alex makes some real weird faces.
Look, do you want my help or not? If you want my help, you better get moving. Try to keep up, okay? Look, do you want my help or not? If you want my help, you better get moving. Try to keep up, okay?
Now you might have noticed that we went from Tech Demo 2 to Tech Demo 5. That is because in the presentation, they didn't show Tech Demo 3 or 4. but we'll look at them now. Here's E3 Tech Demo 3. Apart from it showcasing the sequence of this zombie and this citizen, I'm not entirely sure what else this is supposed to display or was supposed to display. Maybe the map measurements, or maybe the map is unfinished, but I'm not sure. E3 Tech Demo 4 is something I wish they would have showed off at E3. Basically, they made the Kleiner's lab room in the Gold Source style before it changes to the Source Engine style, and then models get added to it. Basically, it's a way of showing how much detail Half-Life 2 would have compared to Half-Life 1. There's also E3 Tech Demo 01A, but that's basically an earlier version of E3 Tech Demo 5. And last of the Tech Demo maps is Demo Physics. This is another map that wasn't shown at E3 presentation. It is basically a different version of Tech Demo 2. I like how they used the earlier interiors of the Citadel for these demos. There are also these spinning parts that we can turn on and then throw a wrench into. Basically, the big thing here is that the moving parts, that's not an animation in the traditional sense. Sure, they are animating right now, but the physics engine is doing that, not the animation of the model itself, so that's something that was pretty big at the time. Next is E3 Fizztown, which is the Raven Home demo. You can notice that the starting part of this map is very much similar to the retail game, but as we move on, the differences start to show. Unfortunately, the swinging metal kill thing didn't work for me, and at the end of the map, you can notice parts of the map that were used in the retail game, but their layout was drastically changed. There's even the lift area that takes us to the chapel. This is E3 Town 05, but I don't think this was part of the E3 presentation. This area is very similar to one of the areas in the retail game, albeit with very minor differences. At the end, the game was stuck on loading because I guess the map it wanted to load into didn't exist. Next up is the iconic Follow Freeman segment. This is E3 C1701. Things to note here are very minor. For example, the Metro Cops and Barney's uniform is different. The citizens have different clothes. The car models are much higher quality than those used in the final game. The force field around the gate is of a different color as well. There's also E3 C1701 Talk, which I'm guessing is an earlier version of the previous map we just looked at. There's no Barney here, but there are citizens and Metro Cops here. Now we're at the Nova Prospect maps. This one is called E3 Bugbait, and I think this was the version they showed off at the presentation. At this point, judging from the names of the maps, this place was called The Prison. If you remember, Nova Prospect started off as The Depot, which later turned into a prison, which later turned into Nova Prospect. This right here is the prison era going into the Nova Prospect era. Now, I was trying to use the antlion testicle to summon my minions, but they weren't showing up, so I had to use Old Reliable. Like most of these maps, many of the sections of these maps were later used in the final game, and some were changed a little bit. This part right here is in the final game, but how it ends is different. To the right of the laundry hall is a hall where we fight the antlion guard, which was kind of interesting. In the retail game, instead of the hall, there's just a dark room here. Next up, we have E3 Prison 1 all the way to E3 Prison 4. I don't think these maps were shown either at the E3 showcase, but these maps are basically centered around the prison levels where it shows different areas of it. The first one has the laundry hall we saw earlier, and it just abruptly ends at the adjacent hall. E3 Prison 2 has us fighting the Combine in this prison block with the antlions behind our back. This is what I was talking about earlier, how you'll immediately see parts of the retail game in the earlier maps. One thing I should mention is that there is a notion that when the leak happened, Half-Life 2 went from looking like this to this. But that's not the case. By the time the leak had happened, Valve were pretty much set and ready on what the final game should look like. What did the leak affect though? Well, it affected a lot of the final map's layouts, models and their textures were slightly changed and so on. The point I'm trying to make is that the leak didn't affect the final result as much as you think. Yes, it was dark and gritty in the beginning of the development, but when the leak had happened, the game was very much like how we see it in retail, although a lot of the layouts and some minor changes in the maps were noticeable. If you play through the 2003 map pack, you'll realize that the maps end right before the Citadel chapter, meaning that they were most likely working on the final chapter of the game when it happened, when the leak happened, and then they had to redo the game, a lot of it, before its release in 2004. Anyway, the prison E3 maps are pretty cool to see. They are like this amalgamation of places we know, mixed in with rooms and halls that were originally supposed to be there, but are not. The fourth prison map is basically E3 bug bait. There are quite a few Highway 17/Wasteland maps in this, but the first one I want to show you is called E3 Seafloor. This is the one they showed at the E3 showcase, at least I think it was. What I absolutely love about these maps is the razor train tracks that fade away into the horizon. It gives off such an ominous feeling that the train is literally heading into nothingness. This part is straight up used in the retail game, however, the way you approach it in these older maps is very different. Areas that are blocked off with debris or mountain later turn out to be the places you entered these areas from, and the starting areas from these older maps are non-existent in the retail game. I'll quickly showcase some more of these seafloor maps. The thing to note is that the map designers had very much cemented the idea of this chapter and how it should play out at this point at least. Granted, it was changed quite a bit at release, but in these older maps, you'll repeatedly see use of many different elements like the dry docks, the combine checkpoints, the looping layout of the area. These elements and more like that will reappear in more of these variations I'll show you. There was even a very early blockout version of one of the maps too. You'll notice that this little base area also appears in many older Wasteland maps as well. But with each variation of these maps, you'll see a gradual build-up in how it went from a blockout to something somewhat detailed. I think the Wasteland wasn't done justice in the retail game. We did get to see a bit of it, but I really like the idea of that level being that it is this big open space that you can roam around and check out places. Now, I know retail Half-Life 2 still does it, but it's on a much smaller scale, I personally think. Now, I'll be quiet for a moment and let you look at the maps. There are also a set of maps called Seacliff. The first one is E3 Seacliff, which I guess they wanted to show off as well but didn't. It also takes place in the Wasteland and has a bit of a different layout than the seafloor maps. There are also earlier versions of this map called E3 Seacliff 01 and E3 Seacliff 1004. There's also a map called E3 Outpost Test, which has us driving a Combine APC and attacking a Combine outpost. It's a fairly basic map with mostly blockouts in it. One thing to note in these seafloor and sea cliff maps is that the water level is very low compared to the retail game. In the retail game, it does show us that the water levels have been decreased because of the Combine, but here, during development, it feels like they wanted that effect to be much more extreme. So you would be basically driving your car on a sea floor, and I think that's pretty awesome. Almost nearing the end, we have that other Fall of Freeman segment that they showcased at E3. This one is called E3 C1702. Now, this wasn't part of the final game, but I do recognize one part of this, which I guess was gradually built up from an earlier 2002 version. Judging from the state of the city, this definitely is taking place during the uprising. Now, before I play the last segment that Valve played at E3 2003, here are 2 extra maps that they didn't show. Now, I kind of remember them showing this off at E3, but I was checking YouTube again to look at the E3 presentation, and I can't say for sure if that's the case or if it's just my faulty memory, so I don't know if they showed this off or not. The first one is E3-02. It starts off from one of the latter levels of the retail game, but then this Hydra sequence begins.
There you are. I wondered what was keeping you. Hope you didn't have any trouble finding me.
The other one is E3 Hydra, which is basically the ending of the last map we just saw. Man, the Hydra was such a cool concept. It just looked cool. I don't know what to say about it. It's a shame they weren't able to implement it in the game though. And finally, we have E3 End. If it looks familiar, that's because this style of zooming into G-Man was also used in the Hazard 01 map.
Well, well, isn't this just like old times?
And with that, we come to the end. As I said in the beginning, E3 used to hold a great significance in the gaming industry, and I think Half-Life 2's showcase in 2003 was one of the best in the event's history. Valve did wanted to showcase the game in 2002's E3 as well, but they didn't. In this modern age, a lot of people prefer to watch an event from their home online, and most major companies like Sony or Nintendo just do their own big events now, so E3's demise was inevitable. And with all that said, farewell E3. You may have not ended on a high note, but hey, you sure put up one hell of a show in your younger years. Thanks so much for watching, and a big thanks to these benefactors for supporting the channel. Cats, T-Boy301, Quiltman, Unusual, 501st Clone Boy, Interloper CS, TTG, Robocop, Noel, Nobody Important, Franco Senlehi, Cheemsburger, Justin Immergriff, Telsaur, Otakan Nachos, Lamdre, Roadkill, Walter, Taylor, Hobgobbies, NoClick, Geout, Fisher Grice, Hawkassault, Mistress Paban, Jelen, A Normal Street Lamp, TRR Droid, and Bipullet. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.